Got it.
Hi, Irene.
Hi, everybody. Nice to meet.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Georgia. I'm going to ask you the first question we have, which is tell us about your Jewish identity.
Sure. I grew up in London, England, and a very traditional Jewish family. Both my parents were Jewish, and my grandmother lived with us. She had emigrated to England from the Pale of Russia around the turn of the century, and she lived with us. She was a widow. And so the primary language in my house as a young child was Yiddish. And we kept kosher, meaning, do you all know what keeping kosher means? You've learned that. Okay, good. So we kept Shabbat. We lit candles every Friday night.
Are you recording?
Am I? Somebody's recording.
I just
Okay,
want to
sorry.
make sure you're recording. I'm bopping into everyone's room and yeah, okay. Thank you.
We kept Shabbat, we lit candles, and we observed Shabbat. We didn't watch television, we didn't sew, we didn't do any jobs. And so that was the beginning of my understanding that I was clearly Jewish and that I was very different from most of the other children that I went to school with who were Christian. We lived in a neighborhood that was not predominantly Jewish. There were two Jewish children in the entire school. I was one of them. And so I had to make some choices about whether I was going to take religious knowledge classes, which were all about the New Testament. And against my parents' wishes, I chose to take those classes. I wanted to know more about what other people believed and thought. So my Jewish identity, in summary, is very, very strong. My nieces and my great nieces and nephews are very Jewishly identified, and so yeah, it's my primary identification. And I will tell you an experience from the early days of Shar Zahav. I'm not sure if you've heard this story or not, but we used to have an annual advance, not a retreat, but an advance. We felt we were always trying to move forward and not backwards. And we would have this big roll of butcher paper laid out on the table. And on one end of the butcher paper was Jewish, the word Jewish, and on the other end of the butcher paper was gay or lesbian. And we were each asked to place a mark where we identified. And within that group, people identified very differently. I primarily identified as Jewish. And some people primarily identified as gay and lesbian, and some people stuck themselves right in the middle. So have you heard that story before?
No, I don't think we've heard that one in class. That's interesting, though.
It's an interesting, it's an interesting way of explaining to you when you ask the question about your Jewish identity. You're asking me, and I'm telling you where I placed myself. Other people will probably give different answers. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I'm just introducing myself. My name is Jason. I'm the timekeeper for our interview. So I'm just letting you know we have like between like 5 to 6 minutes per question, but we still have like a minute and 30 left for this question if you want
It's
to
up
continue.
to
But I
my
just wanted to let
questioner
you
whether
know
she wants to hear
I'll
some more.
stop you at like 6 minutes.
Do you feel like you have to choose, like, I mean, in your story about the butcher paper, do you feel like you have to navigate like some sort of choice between religion and sexuality? And how do you feel like those subjects sort of intersect?
That's at the heart of this whole course, really, or this whole session of this course. Yes, I do often feel that way, actually. I think I feel particularly that way in this time where the Middle East is in such crisis, and there are opinions in the LGBTQ community with which I don't agree, and where I feel like I'm leaning much more into my Jewish identity than my LGBTQ identity right now. That is subject to change. You know, when marriage equality was a question, and my wife and I realized that we could get married, then my LGBTQ identity was primary to me, because I felt that now we were being given legal rights which we had never had before. And this was a huge, huge step for us, being in a committed relationship at that point for many, many years. So you can see that it's circumstantial. Where your identity moves and shifts depends on what's going on with what's affecting you in the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Our second primary question for you is, how did your Jewish identity develop from childhood until now?
I love that question. My dad loved going to shul, going to services, and he went for all high holidays and sometimes on Saturdays. And he was quite devout. He told me that when his mother died, who I never met, she died before I was born, that he went to shul every day for a year and said the prayers of mourning. And so my dad was very instrumental in modeling for me what it meant to love being Jewish and love the services and love going. And so as a child, I went to services, and we were members of a synagogue that was, in England, it's called United Synagogues. Here it's called the Conservative Movement, where the women sat upstairs and the men sat downstairs. We were divided. And I loved looking down and seeing my father in his tallis praying. And so my childhood was full of love for Judaism. And I took Hebrew classes, and I loved studying the Hebrew. And so here's a moment in time that's a feminist moment. At age 12, I was told I should not take any more Hebrew classes because I was not going to get bar or bat mitzvahed, because in England at that time, girls did not get bat mitzvahed. And it was devastating to me. But this was the early, this was the 50s, and that's the way it was. So I stopped going to Hebrew classes. I continued going to services, but then, of course, the big pivotal moment was at age 24, I came to the United States and left my family home and came here to make a new life for myself. And after a lot of traveling around the country, I landed in San Francisco. And so once I had decided that I had frankly run out of money, and San Francisco was where I had to stop. So I was like, okay, this is where I guess I'm going to be living. And then I started looking for people like myself. And it took a very long time, 10 years, before I came to San Francisco in 1969. And it wasn't until 1979 that I found Shar Zahav. And I remember the moment that I walked into Shar Zahav feeling, I've just found my people. And this is where I can continue my Jewish identity, even though I recognize that I'm a lesbian. I'm not going to marry a man. I'm not going to have children with a man. That's not what's going to happen. I'm going to try to find a woman that I can be in partnership with, but I want to continue my Jewish learning and community and enrich my Jewish identity. And so if I had not discovered Shar Zahav, I'm not sure that I would have been able to continue feeling as Jewishly as I do today. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's really cool.
For the third question that we had for you was, what are some of the ideas, values, and reasons that you take pride in being Jewish?
Can I repeat the question so I'm sure what you're asking me? What are some of the values and ideas that could you repeat it? I'm sorry. I can't hear you.
Sorry, of course. What are some of the ideas, values, and reasons that you take pride in being Jewish?
I take pride in the fact that I experience my Jewishness. I have experienced my Jewishness in a tribal. I like to use the word tribal because I feel that one of our ideals is that we take care of each other. If someone's in trouble, health-wise, financially, emotionally, I feel like we step up. We don't wait to be asked. We step up for each other. And I think that that's a very primal and tribal way of being. And it's something that I love about being Jewish. I love that you can go to any Jewish person's house and find something to eat. There's always food in our lives. We never travel to someone else's house without food, and we never have an empty refrigerator. We're always ready to feed somebody, always. It's also tribal, but it's part of being Jewish. Humor. We are very funny people. People don't really know that. But if you look around at the comedians and the satirists and the entertainers in the world, most of them are Jewish because we've had to have a sense of humor. Everybody has wanted to annihilate us from the beginning of time. And if you can't have a sense of humor, you'd never take your head out from under the covers. And we have great sense of humor. We laugh at ourselves, we laugh at other people, and we laugh at the world because that's survival. This is a tricky question because it can lead to somebody's stereotyping. I don't want to say to you, oh, we're all so smart, because we're not all so smart, but a lot of us are pretty smart. You know, this education is emphasized in our world, and education is recognized as being important if you want to succeed and be able to have a rich life. You know, a big part of being Jewish is appreciating culture, appreciating music and theater and art and dance. And if you want to be able to enjoy those things, you have to have money. And if you're going to have money, you have to be able to work. And so it's all kind of connected. We're okay. In summary, we're a people who are pleasure seeking. We look like we're serious, and we look like we're full of grief, and we look like we're wringing our hands all the time. But basically, we want to have a good time. And I think that that's a real essence of being Jewish.
Thank you for that.
Does that
That was
answer
very
your
beautiful.
question?
Yes, absolutely.
Does it
For the
surprise
fourth
you?
one,
Does my
did it
answer surprise you in any way?
No, it didn't really surprise me because I feel like within the community there's always been like a sense of community from an outsider's perspective. I feel like I've always seen that. And then I also think that like education is definitely like heavily talked about in your guys' community. I see that as well. So it wasn't very surprising. It was all great insights though. So thank you for that.
Okay.
And then the fourth question that we had lined up was tell us about your LGBTQIA identity.
Um, okay. Um, wow, it's who I am.
Yeah.
My identity. I have known since I was maybe 4 years old that I was different from other girls. And I didn't know what that difference was until I was in my early 20s and fell in love with the first woman that I had fallen in love with. And that then it all became clear to me, and I recognized that that had always been part of me and part of why I always felt different. And so, and it was a big part of why I had to leave my family. I felt that I could not fulfill my potential, my human potential, in a culture which in Northwest London at that time was very, very rigid and had very narrow expectations of everybody. You were to marry a nice Jewish boy who hopefully was an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor, and you would have children, and you would go to synagogue and make donations and keep the Shabbat and so on and so forth. And this is the culture in which I grew up. And I knew in my late teens that that was not A, what I wanted, or B, what was going to happen for me. So my LGBTQ identity forced me to go find somewhere to live where I could be my whole authentic self. And that word authentic is a very important word. And San Francisco and my association with Shar Zahav and the strength that I got from that community enabled me to live an authentic life as a lesbian. And ultimately, when I met the woman who would be my wife for 25 years, she died 2 years ago. She was not Jewish, but she was an atheist. And I was so grateful because we didn't have to battle about Christmas or Easter or any of those things because she could have cared less. And she embraced my Jewishness, and she embraced Shar Zahav in many ways. And she has a daughter that she had been married and had a daughter. And that daughter, well, maybe this is for another question. It's kind of a long story, and maybe I've taken up my 5 minutes on this answer, but I do have an interesting story for you about how we created family together, literally. So I'll leave you with that teaser.
Okay. Thank you for answering that such a person. It's very inspiring.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask the next few questions, but the next question I'm about to ask, you're more than welcome to introduce that story because I think it might have to do with the next question.
Okay.
So, what are some ideas, values, and reasons that you take pride in being LGBTQIA plus?
I think that when you fully when I fully accepted my difference in the world, I think it enabled me to accept other people's difference in the world and to have a greater sense of empathy for people who have struggled to break away from their families, to create lives for themselves, to choose their religions, to choose who they love, to choose how they're going to make family. I think the sense of empathy and compassion that that has come to me through being different is a value I hold very highly, and it's a value that I don't necessarily witness I go back to England quite frequently, and they are all happily married with lots of children, and they're all, doing their lives. And I don't necessarily see that in my nieces and nieces and great nephews. I see a sort of a complacency that the normalcy of their lives has allowed them the luxury of complacency. And we have never had the luxury of complacency, either as Jews or as LGBTQ people. You're always looking over your shoulder. You're always wondering how you're going to be perceived, do you feel safe in this situation? Can you and your partner walk down the street holding hands? Can you visit countries with your partner? I mean, I have told friends, I'm sorry, I'm not going to Morocco with you. I'm sorry, I'm not going to Dubai with you. I'm sorry, I'm not going to these countries where, as a woman, as a Jew, as a lesbian, I won't feel safe.
That's a
Is that-
really beautiful answer. Thank you. That's a really amazing point. I love what you said about complacency. That's awesome. And moving on to the next question, I think that you touched on this when you're talking about the Middle East and you're kind of like leaning towards your more religious side of things. However, when and how did these two identities conflict, and how did you reconcile them? And to be like integrated as both Jewish and queer.
Oh, that's a very interesting and challenging question. Oh boy. Can you repeat it so I can think about it a bit longer?
Yes, of course. Okay, so when and how did these two identities conflict, and how did you reconcile so as to be well integrated as both Jewish and queer?
I think that I think Shar Zahav was the perfect training ground to answer that question. In the early days at Shar Zahav, we were a small group. We were struggling to form this community, and people came from very different backgrounds. And there were more men than women involved in the formation of this community. Let me just say that up front. And because there were more men, they had had more Jewish education than any of the women, for the most part. And so they had a very strong opinion about what our liturgy should look like, how much Hebrew there should be in the liturgy, about how often certain prayers should be said, and they had very strong opinions. And as a woman coming into this community, I wasn't coming in only as a queer woman, I was coming in as a feminist. And you can't leave that word out of the development of this community, because this community grew up in a very male-oriented society. And there was a battle between language, how we were going to degenderize the literary. Aren't we too smart to assume that God is a male? I mean, don't we know enough to know that that's an absurd assumption? And so what are we going to do with the liturgy that is so male dominated? And so I'm switching your question a little bit because I want to insert the word feminist along with gay identified. There was a big struggle in the 60s and 70s for women to find equal respect, and especially among Jewish men, even though they were gay Jewish men. The Jewish men have ruled Jewish liturgy and Jewish prayer and Jewish services since the beginning of time. And here we were saying, I don't think so. I think we're in the 21st century. Can't we make this more equal? Can't we bring this up to date? So it was more of our feminist identity, my feminist identity, that conflicted with my Jewish identity when we were trying to build a society in our city that was more respectful of both genders. Does that answer your question?
That totally answers my question. That makes sense. I love that.
Yeah, there's more women in here. I think, well, I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I've made my point.
Thank you for sharing. I'm Jasmine. I'm going to be conducting the next part of the interview. And you kind of briefly just talked about Scheherazade and how you came across it in 1997. But could you explain-
1979.
1979, sorry. How you became involved with the congregation?
How did I become involved?
Involved with the congregation of Scheherazade. And Rabbi Angel had also mentioned that you were a former president as well.
Yeah, so I walk in and it's 1979, it's Friday night services, and there are about 20 guys and 2 women, and I'm one of them. And so services happen, and I'm thrilled and delighted, and I go back the following Friday for more. And there was a member there who was one of the founding members, Daniel Chesser, who is still around, but not doing so great. He's struggling. Anyway, he was like the headhunter for Shahrzad. He sort of took one look at me and he knew that I was someone who could get stuff done. You know, he just knew. And he comes up to me. This is my second time at services. And he says, you know, San Francisco is going to host the 5th International Conference of Gay and Lesbian Jews. Would you like to be on the committee to organize that? I didn't even know what he was talking about. I didn't even know such a thing existed. And I just said yes, because yes is my default. And so next thing I knew, I was partnered with another member, Aaron Cooper, and he and I produced this 5th International Conference of Gay and Lesbian Jews, where people came from all over the place. I mean, all over the world to come to San Francisco, and we had discussion groups, and we had some entertainment, we had a big party, and we had this whole thing going. And of course, you know, once you show leadership that you get stuff done, you just keep getting asked to get more stuff done. And so then pretty soon someone asked me if I would be the treasurer, because they knew I had some financial background, and then I was the treasurer. And then we were talking about buying a building. By then we had about 70 or 80 members. And we were running out of spaces where we could hold our services, and we had to schlep our prayer books and store the prayer books away. We didn't have a home. We had temporary rentals. And so why don't we try to buy a building? Well, then I chaired the fundraising campaign to buy our first building. And that was at Danvers and Caselli, charming little church. And next thing I know, I'm president. And so, that's kind of how it goes. It's no different from any other organization. There are people that make a beeline for people like me. And that's
Thank you
basically
for
what happened.
Thank you for
Sorry.
sharing that. No, I'm sorry. Thank you for sharing. That was really interesting that even on just the second time you went there, they saw the potential in you.
Yeah.
So we are planning on going to Shabbat services this Friday night, and in your professional opinion, what should we know in preparation of attending the services?
You should know that you're going to be pleasantly surprised. I think even virtually, you're going to experience the warmth of the community. You're going to experience the beauty of our sanctuary. You're going to see how united people feel, and how familiar most people are with the ritual. The open, here's what we do at the beginning. We sing, "Oh, say shalom," how good it is to be together. And then we say the same prayers over, and then the candles are lit, and so you'll see the ritual of what Friday night Shabbat is to a Jewish community in a synagogue. And it's very ritual. These are the things that have to happen. And you'll hear a sermon, a drash, we call it a drash, sermon delivered by whoever's delivering the sermon. It might be the rabbi, it might be a lay leader. And at the close of the service, everybody gathers for food, of course, because there's always food. And I think that you will, I don't want to tell you what you're going to feel, because you're going to feel whatever you're going to feel. I think you're going to enjoy it. And I'm going to be on Zoom this Friday with you. I can't do the following Friday, but I will be on Zoom. So maybe I'll get to know what you feel on Friday.
Great, thank you. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, good. Anything else? Wow. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I'd like to ask you another question.
Yep.
I was wondering if you could share some thoughts about feminism and how feminism shaped and influenced your identity.
Oh, where do I begin? Okay, I'll begin. I remember the moment. I was a tomboy. I loved to play sports. I played soccer in the streets with the boys. I played cricket in the street with the boys. I loved soccer. I loved going to Hebrew classes. And at some point in my life, I was told, you can't play soccer, you can't play cricket, and you're not going to have a bar mitzvah. I think that was the beginning of my feminism. It's like, what? Why? Is my brain less than yours? Are my feet less nimble than yours? Is my hand-eye coordination less perfect than yours? No, just because of how society has been created to divide what was appropriate for boys and what was appropriate for girls. Fortunately, that's all changed. When I see the women's professional soccer teams now, I weep with joy. I weep at their athleticism. I weep that they're earning money doing this. I just, when I see the women basketball players, the same thing. It's like, yes, yes, isn't this the way it should be? I was angry. That's where feminism comes from. I was pissed off. How can you treat half the world like their brain doesn't function as well as yours, and their feet don't function as well as yours, and their hand-eye coordination is not as good as yours? It comes from rage. Feminism and activism come from rage and come from disappointment and come from a sense of injustice and unfairness, and you have to be strong. I mean, this is crazy, but I remember a time sitting on a step outside some building, and my sister, who is 7 years older than me and who was the good girl, did everything right, married, 2 children, perfect, everything right. So I'm sitting on this step wearing a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, and I can't demonstrate, but I've got sort of my knees apart. And she says to me, "You can't sit like that. No girl sits like that." Why? I didn't know enough to say why back then. I just put my knees together and said, okay. I don't know if as a guy you can understand how that rage slowly builds in a woman until you're like, that's enough of that. And oh, I'll tell you another story. In London, I worked for an American company, which strongly influenced my desire to come and live in America. And this company was expanding rapidly, and I was responsible for handling the sort of administrative aspects of it. The leases, setting up the new office spaces, ordering equipment, blah, blah, blah. And every time they opened a new office, they had to have another manager, and all the managers were men. And I knew way more than most of the men about how to run these places, but this was my job. I was the assistant. Okay, fast forward, I moved to the United States. I come to the West Coast. I'm looking for work. I contact this company, same company. They hire me. They hire me to do their computer conversion, going from manual bookkeeping to computer bookkeeping. And I'm traveling all over California, training all these managers on how to switch over to the new system and so on. And I'm writing a report to the vice presidents of what I'm observing in these offices about how the managers are adapting to the change and the shift in how we do things. And at some point, the leadership of this company said to me, why don't you go into the management training program? Okay, I'll go in the management training program. That's great. So I did, and they gave me an office to manage, the first one, small office. And then I was successful, and then they gave me a larger office, and then a larger office, and a larger office. And I went, during my time with this company, I went back to London, and I visited with a former colleague in the same company in London, and he said, "I can't believe they made you a manager." There you go. Does that answer your question about feminism?
Yes, thank you very much for your insight. That was very helpful.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. That's all the questions we were giving, but we have a lot of time. And I'm still thinking about that story you said about how you and your wife managed to make a family. So
Good.
can you tell us that story real quick?
Yes, I'll do it as quickly as I can. Susie's was my wife. Susie's daughter, Rachel, came to us when she was 39, and she said, I know I'm not going to get in a relationship, but I think I'd be a good parent, and I'd like to be a parent, but I can't do it on my own. Will you help me? And I and we agreed to help her. And that meant that we went together, the three of us, to the organization that provided sperm donors, and we reviewed all the books of the donors, and together we came up with our top three, and each of us had this one donor that we had picked, each of us, and so we said he's going to be that donor. And to make a long story short, Rachel became pregnant and had a baby boy. And that baby boy is about to graduate from high school next week. And when he spent every Friday night and Saturday with Susie and I, we would do Shabbat together. We'd light candles. We'd say the prayers. We'd have dinner together. And at some point when he was 8 or 9, he said to us, and his donor is Jewish, by the way. Rachel is not. She's the daughter of the atheist wife of mine. And he said, I'm Jewish. I know I'm Jewish. And he listed all the reasons why he knew he was Jewish, many of which I've already talked about. And I said, if you are serious about being Jewish, you need to have a bar mitzvah. You need to study. You need to learn to read Hebrew. And it's a big commitment. It takes several years. And this is what you have to do if you want to do this. And he did it. And he had a bar mitzvah at Shar Zahav. And he claims his Jewishness. And he still spends Friday night with me and Saturday. And he's very loved in the community. Everybody knows him. He's a big strapping guy now, 150, 60 pounds, 5'8", big Jufro, lots of hair. And so we made family. And it was something I never imagined I was going to have the opportunity to do, was to help raise a child and help him in many, many, many ways. And I feel like I have been somewhat of a parent to him. And he's Jewish. He'll help anybody. He's funny. That's how we made family. When he's 18, which is in a week, he can choose to contact his donor if he wants to. So far, he's not been interested. He said, you're my grandma's, you're my mom. I know who my family is. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's a beautiful story. Thank you so much.
We were actually interviewed. Camille actually was approached many years ago by StoryCorps. Do you know StoryCorps? StoryCorps is a part of National Public Radio where they interview people's life and they want to hear their life stories and they post them occasionally. And they were looking for lesbian grandmas. And Camille introduced them to me and Susie, and we made a recording for StoryCorps all about how we became lesbian grandmas. So, yeah.
That's awesome. I don't really have any other questions, but if you guys have some, feel free. I think we have about 8 minutes left.
Yeah, good.
Could you talk maybe a little bit how you met your wife?
Oh, sure. I had made some good friends in traveling across country, which I did for many months. I'd made some good friends in Colorado Springs. And in Colorado Springs, I don't know if you know much about Colorado Springs, but it was a bastion of conservative, Republican, right-wing life. The NORAD is stationed there. The Naval Academy is stationed there. It's a very, very conservative place. And my friend that I met was a nurse practitioner. Susie was a family nurse practitioner. She was an FNP. And they worked in a women's health clinic that was doing the first abortions west of the Mississippi, in a very dangerous place, in a very dangerous time. These were very, very brave women. And I heard from my friend that one of her colleagues from the clinic had moved to San Francisco and was looking for new friends. And so she contacted me and we arranged to meet. And the story that I have told a few times is that she showed up at my door wearing these Converse sneakers and mismatched socks and these kind of clown pants. And I don't know, she was such an anarchist and and had a kind of her own style. And I showed up at my door with my standard poodle and my sort of, clothes that I wear. And we were very different. We were very different, but we really liked each other a great deal. And we couldn't stop talking about books and movies and kids and dogs and food and wine and travel and blah, 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 blah. And that's how we met. We were introduced by a mutual friend, which is how a lot of people meet. And we had 25 glorious years together of much fun and creating family.
That's so sweet. I love that.
Good. Yeah, it is sweet. And I feel very fortunate. I feel very blessed. And yeah. How are we doing? I got 154. Oh, here she is. 4 minutes to wrap up. Anything else anybody wants to know?
I think we covered all of the topics we had planned for today, but we really appreciate you taking the time to coming and sharing your stories, sharing your insights. It was really great to meet with you and speak with you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think this is a wonderful way to, what better way is there for us all to broaden our horizons than to have this kind of intimacy? It's rare in our society today. And ironically, Zoom, brings intimacy back into our lives. It's sort of a miracle of modern life, I think. And I'm just curious, we have a couple of seconds. Where are you all from? Just tell me where you all look like you're from somewhere. Anybody?
I'm currently from the Bay Area. I'm in San Jose right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm from Mexico. Right now, I'm in Mexico right now, but I'm from northern Mexico, so it's the same time zone.
Okay, great.
I'm from San Francisco.
Oh, great. Okay.
Currently in San Francisco, but I'm from Los Angeles.
Okay.
I'm also from Los Angeles.
Okay.
I'm currently in San Francisco, but I'm from San Jose.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, welcome to virtual San Francisco. Yeah.
I do have a question for you real quick that I just thought of. Is the rest of your family that's still in London, are they still Jewish? And do you see any differences between how they practice the religion versus how you do it here in the States or in San Francisco?
Oh, yes, 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 yes. Yes, they're still Jewish. Yes, they're very excited because this coming October, I'm going to be there for the high holidays for the first time since I left. I'm going to be celebrating Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur with them, which I've avoided for all these years simply because of that question that you've asked. I don't like how they do their Judaism. I like my Judaism in Shar Zahav. This is my tribe. This is how I've contributed to how I want to do my Judaism. So I'm taking a big leap of faith by celebrating high holidays in London. Many of my nieces and great nieces have visited me here. I did a Seder here once in my house, and my niece and her husband said it was the loveliest Seder they'd ever been to. I brought my niece to services at Shar Zahav, and she was, this is incredible. Why don't we do this? And so I've tried to bring my family into the Jewishness that I've created here, and they like it very much. It's still rather retro back there, I'm afraid. It still just isn't what I ever wanted or want now, I'm afraid. It's changed, but not enough for me. Thank you. It's a good question.
Thank you. Thank you for answering.
Yeah. Oh, wow. It's great. Good for you. Good for you for your curiosity and your intellect. I'm very admiring. These have been very good questions.
I think we only have like, only a minute left. Maybe I'll save my next time.
Okay, we'll have more time. Yeah, leave breakout room. Okay, I'm good at following instructions. Bye-bye.
I
Thank
think
you so
Bye.
much.